All right, guys. So now let's talk about uh, value. Okay, so value is the relative degree of light and dark in like a shade or a color. All right, so here we have a colored image. However, we're going to be drawing in black and white, right? Sorry, there's a fly. So you don't need to have color, or you don't need to think about using color just because your reference has color. We're just going to be thinking about matching the degree of value. Okay, so first let's talk about what the values on this image here. All right, technically speaking, the darkest value just in general, not thinking about this reference, right, is the color black, right? So if we look at the sides of my screen here, that's pretty close to black. Not, it's still kind of grayish, right? But that color doesn't exist on this reference, right? So instead of thinking, oh, what's the darkest color, what's the darkest value possible, we have to look for the darkest value on our reference. Okay, and that's these shadows right here. There's some more intense shadows on the in this like right side and underside part of the mountain. Um, so that's going to be our darkest value in our drawing. Okay. Next, we have our highlights. All right. So our highlights in this image are going to be a little bit harder to find, right? The clouds, since they're white, you would assume, oh, okay, that means they're going to have the brightest highlight, right? The lightest value. Unfortunately, it's not technically true, right? If you look in the clouds, you see these different degrees of gray, right? It's a very light gray, but it's still gray. Even this part right here, although it's white, it translates as white. You think it's white, it's still kind of gray, right? If you look closely, this you can tell that this part is gray where my mouse is because this part here is a little bit lighter, right? But even then, this part is still a little bit gray. So technically, we don't really have the lightest value possible, which is white, on our reference, right? Another thing that's going to be difficult with highlights is comparing like this value, if this was just black and white, to this value, if this was just black and white, right? Which of these is going to be lighter, right? That's kind of the hard part for the artist, right? For the person drawing, you have to decide: am I going to make them the same value because I only have black and white, right? Or am I going to make them a different, or am I going to make them a different value, right? Even the slightest difference could change how your audience or your viewer sees uh, uh, the drawing, right? If it's too similar, right? If these are the same value on your drawing, then your viewer isn't going to be able to differentiate between the mountain and the cloud. So you actually need to make a slight value difference, just so even if it's not 100% true, right? You might need to put in a slight value difference just to make sure that this mountain stands apart from the clouds, right? Um, yeah, so other than the highlights, right, which is the most intense light, or the lightest value, right, and the shadows, which is the darkest value, and the place with the least amount of light, you also have this middle area, right? It's called a midtone. Okay, so a midtone, a good example of a midtone is this brown right here, right? So this brown right here, which isn't exactly a highlight or a shadow, right? Because it's in the light, but it's not like these little ledges here, which are like slightly closer to the light, which is why they're a little bit brighter, right? That would be where your midtone is, right? That's if this entire thing was black and white, I would even say most of this image is going to stay in some sort of midtone, right? The only parts that are not are going to be the dramatically different parts, such as the highlights and the shadows. Everything else should stay in some form of a midtone, either like a slightly darker midtone or a slightly lighter midtone, or right in the middle, in that medium midtone.